Masechta Shkolim, Perek Zayin, Mishnah Aleph. So we discussed in the previous Perek how there were 13 collection boxes of money in the Beis HaMikdash. So the Mishnah now discusses the status of coins that are found on the floor between the two boxes. Now, is there a Shiloh Hashavas Haved over here, or it belongs to somebody else? Let's see what the Mishnah has to say. Moishe Nimtzu Bein Hashkolim Lanadava. If coins were found between the Shkolim chest and the box for Nadavis, between chest number 1 and 13, the 13th chest stood in a circle, so the first chest, which is that of the Shkolim, stood right next to the 13th one, because it was around on the other side. And it's not known from which of these two boxes the coin fell. Karv la Shkolim, Yiplu la Shkolim. If the coins are closer to the Shkolim box, they're assumed to have fallen from there and should therefore be placed in the Shkolim chest. Lanadava, Yiplu Lanadava. If they're closer to the box of the money, the pushka for the Nadavis, that should be placed in the pushka of Nadavis. If they're found halfway between the two, they should be placed in the pushka for Nadavis. We must place the coins in the pushka that's used for the more sacred purpose. This way we can be sure that the money will not be used for anything less because of Ma'alim B'Kodesh. This way we can be sure that the money will not be used for anything else than for the less sacred purpose than the one for which it was originally designated. The coins for the Nadavis fund are used only for Karbonos Oilo, which are burnt entirely on the Mizbeach, whereas those in the Shkolim fund are also used for Karbonos Tzibur that are partially eaten by the Kehanim, such as Korban Chatas or Rosh Chodesh, and for all the Yom Tovim. A carbon that's entirely burnt on the Mizbeach is considered more Kadosh because it's given entirely to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This makes the Oila more Kadosh than the Chatas, even though they're both Kosher Kachim, but the Chatas, the Kehanim, eat it. Additionally, leftover Shkolim funds are used to pay for the Bedek Habayis and to fix up Yerushalayim and not for Karbanis. So there's more the Nadava is more Mekel. Okay. The Torah gives us a number of rules for dealing with Sveikis, and it's important to know that because we're going to be dealing with that in the next couple of Mishnayos. One of these halachas is to assume that something of unknown origin comes from the place closest to where it was found. That's called karev. Since we don't know from which pushka the coin fell from, we assume that they fell from the closest one. However, there's an even more well-known halacha, which says that in matters of a suffix, we should assume that it came from the roiv. This rule supersedes the rule of closest. Therefore, our Mishnah must be discussing a case where the two pushkas had the same number of coins in them. For if one had more, we would assume that the coins that you found came from that one, even though the other one was closer. That's the halacha here in the Mishnah. If coins were found between the pushka of Eitzim and the pushka for Levaina, Karv la'Eitzim, Yiplu la'Eitzim. If the coins are closer to the pushka for wood, they should be placed in the pushka for wood. La'Levaina, Yiplu la'Levaina. If they're closer to the frankincense pushka, they should be placed in the Levaina pushka. Mechtel mechtel, Yiplu la'Levaina. If they were found halfway between the two pushkas, they should be placed in the one for Levaina, because the Levaina had more kedusha than the Eitzim. Even though the Eitzim went on the Mizbeach, but the Levaina was used as a carbon, while the Eitzim was used as fuel to burn the other carbonos. Ben Kinan Legoiz Le'ayla. If coins were found between the bird pairs, meaning the Kinan were the bird pushka, whose funds were used to purchase pairs of birds consisting of an Oyla and a Chatas, and the young Oyla bird chest, which was the next one, Karv Lakinim Yiplu Lakinim, because it was one of Goiz Le'ayla and Kinan, which we spoke in the previous parak. If the coins are closer to the Kinan, the pushka for the kinam, they should be placed in the pushka for the kinam. If they're closer to the ones for the young birds, then they should be placed in the pushka for the young birds. If the coins are halfway between the two chests, they should be placed in the young oila bird chest, pushka. Since this fund is used only for karbonis oila, it has more kedusha than the kinam, which also has a fund that goes to chatas, which is eaten by the kehanim. This Mishnah follows the sheet of the Rabbonon in Perek Vav Mishnah Hey. This still leaves us with a problem, because the kinim are used to complete the tower process for certain types of tumah, and the chatas plays a critical role in this procedure. How then will the person who deposited the money in this pushka complete his tower process if the money is used only for oilus? So take care of this, to answer this question, to take care of this possibility, the gizbar in the Beis HaMikdash would give communal funds to buy karban chatas for those whose money might have been lost, which we mentioned in the Mishnah over there. But being machmer and assuming that the money fell from the oila, the oila pushka, we don't risk using chatas money for an oila who has a different type of matan damim. For the Bezdin stipulates that any leftover chatas funds are to be used for oilas, and this includes our case as well. Bein chulin l'maiser sheni, a similar discussion regarding a similar situation that could arise outside the Makom HaMikdash. Bein chulin l'maiser sheni, if coins were found between a pushka containing regular money and a money that a pushka that contains maiser sheni money, karv lachulin yiplu lachulin. If they're closer to the regular coins, they should be placed with the regular coins. L'maiser sheni yiplu l'maiser sheni. If they're closer to the maiser sheni coins, they should be placed with the maiser sheni coins. Mechzel yiplu l'maiser sheni. If they were found halfway between the chulin and the maiser sheni coins, they should be placed with maiser sheni since they're more kaddish. This is the rule. This is the bottom line. We follow the closest possible source, even to be mekel, because we assume that the coins fell from the closest source. But when neither of them is closer, it's equally distant between either one of these two pushkas, the coins are found halfway between the two pushkas, then we have to be machmir. Since using coins for a less sacred purpose than that for which they were originally intended is asur min Torah, we have to follow the general rule of being machmir in a suffix deraisa. As we know, the halacha is the suffix deraisa is l'chumra. So that's why we have to go, because of Ma'al Kodesh, as we spoke previously. Mishnah Beis. Coins that are found in front of the premises of animal sellers in Yerushalayim are always assumed to be maiser sheni money, because in the times of the Beis HaMikdash, most of the animals purchased in Yerushalayim throughout the year are bought with maiser sheni money. Maiser sheni money may be used to purchase food in Yerushalayim to be eaten there. People didn't generally make a special trip to Yerushalayim to spend their maiser sheni money. Rather, they brought it with them and they came for the Yom Tovim. Since they were usually unable to spend all the maiser sheni they had during the brief periods of time they spent in Yerushalayim, they would leave the remaining maiser sheni money with friends and relatives to spend the money throughout the rest of the year and eat it in Yerushalayim. Although maiser sheni money can be used to purchase anything edible, it's most often used to buy animals that were used as shlomim, as korban shlomim. These animals were marked for them in the Beis HaMikdash, and the basar was eaten by the people who were bringing them. So due to the large amounts of maiser sheni money circulating around Yerushalayim, and the fact that most of it was used to buy korban shlomim, we assume that most animals purchased throughout the year were bought by maiser sheni money. Therefore, any coins found around the premises of livestock dealers are assumed to be maiser sheni coins that had fallen from would-be buyers. Although it's possible that the coins fell from the dealer after he sold the animal, in which case the maiser sheni, the kedushas maiser, transfers from the coins to the animal. The coins are no longer kadosh with kedushas maiser, since there are many more customers than dealers. The rule of following the roiv directs us to assume that the coins fell from a prospective buyer while they were still carried the kedushas maiser. The harabayis chulin. However, coins that are found on the harabayis are assumed to be chulin, because most of the money carried around Yerushalayim is not maiser sheni money, even if the money was found during the Shalosh Regalim. When most of the money in Yerushalayim is maiser sheni, we may still assume that the money had fallen before the Yantif, and that most of the money is not maiser sheni. Since most of the money carried throughout the year is not maiser sheni money, we judge the money found even during the Yom Tovim as being from the Rav, which is most of the year, which was before the Yantif, Yerushalayim. But if the money is found anywhere else in Yerushalayim, outside the Harabayis, and not in front of an animal dealer, then the halacha is like this: B'shas regel maiser. If it was found during one of the Yom Tovim, it's assumed that it's maiser sheni money, since Yerushalayim is flooded with people who have come for the Yom Tovim and brought their maiser sheni money with them. We cannot assume that the money fell before the Yom Tov, because the streets of Yerushalayim were carefully swept each day, and had the money fallen before the Yom Tov, it surely would have been found and removed immediately. The Harabayis, on the other hand, was not swept every day, because it was a higher windswept area which didn't need to be cleaned frequently. Therefore, coins that were found in the Harabayis may be assumed to have fallen from before the Yom Tov, but anywhere else in Yerushalayim not. But the rest of the year, chulin, coins found at any other time of the year, are assumed to be ordinary money, since there's more ordinary money in Yerushalayim throughout the year than maiser sheni money. So it depends where, and it depends when. Now, it does say in Brachos, in the last parak, that we don't go into Yerushalayim you don't go into the Harabayis with your money belt. So maybe money you could go in, especially if you want to bring it to the Beis HaMikdash for tzedakah, for karbanos, or something along those lines, or for the shkalim, like we spoke. Then there's stark makom that you should be able to bring it there as well. Mishnah Gimel. Basar shenimtza ba'azara, meat that was found in the azara, and the status is unknown, the suffix of what this is. So, to understand this Mishnah properly, it's necessary to know what's done with the meat of different types of karbonos. The meat of a korban oila is that it's completely burnt in the mizbeach. After it's shechted, the oil is cut into large pieces, which are called evarim, which are then placed in the mizbeach and burnt. This may be done at any time during the day and night following the shechita. After that, the meat becomes no good, becomes disqualified. Now you have a chatas or an asham. After being shechted, some of these karbanos, the fats are burnt on the mizbeach, and the rest of the meat is eaten by the kehanim in the azara. It may be eaten on the day of the shechita and during the following night until chatzos. Now a shlamim and ma'aseh behema. Here too, some of the fats are burnt on the mizbeach, and the meat is then eaten by the bailam and the guests throughout Yerushalayim for 2 days and the night in between. Part of the meat of the shlam is given to the kehanim to eat. Then you have a toida ve'el nazir. These are subject to the same rules as shlamim and ma'aseh behema, except that they may be eaten for only 1 day and 1 night, just like a chatas. So if you have a piece of meat, so you don't know how long you can hold on to it for or when you can eat it till. So Ivarin oilis, if whole limbs were found, the meat was cut into large cuts into which an oila is divided before being placed on the mizbeach. So they are assumed to be the meat of a korban oila. Since the oila is cut into certain pieces, the meat of other karbanos, which is meant to be eaten, is cut into slices and not big, huge chunks. Nevertheless, these evarim may not be placed on the mizbeach, as the Mishnah will explain shortly. Found meat that's disqualified is disqualified no matter which korban it comes from, and the need to decide which offering it comes from will be explained a little later in the Mishnah. If slices of meat were found in the azara, they were assumed to be from a korban chatas. Although all karbanos whose meat is eaten are cut into slices, it's unusual to eat the meat of a shlamim or similar karbanos in the azara, since they may be eaten anywhere in Yerushalayim. The meat is therefore assumed to be from a chatas because it's the only kachim that you would be eating in the azara. It's possible that the meat could be from an asham as well, since an asham is also eaten by the kahanim in the azara. However, the meat of the chatas and an asham share the same halacha, so it makes no difference whether the meat is from a chatas or an asham. It's the same thing, meaning everything that applies to the meat of a chatas applies to the basar ha'asham as well. Yerushalayim zivchei shlamim. If meat was found outside the Beis HaMikdash anywhere in Yerushalayim, it's assumed to be from a korban shlamim, which may be eaten anywhere in Yerushalayim. It could be from a toider el nazir or ma'aseh behema, or even a chulin, all of which may be eaten throughout Yerushalayim as well. The Mishnah uses the term shlamim only because most meat eaten throughout Yerushalayim was b'sar shlamim. Since the meat of oil, chatz, and asham may not be removed from the azara, we may assume that the meat found outside the azara is not from one of these karbanos. Zevazeh to ubar to rasai. In either case, whether the meat that was found in the azara and is assumed to be from either an oil, chatz, or asham, or whether it was found somewhere in Yerushalayim and assumed to be from a shlamim, it may not actually be eaten or burned on the mizbeach. Rather, it should be left overnight to uvar to rasai until its appearance changes and then become disqualified. Meat left overnight loses its moisture, which results in its losing its robust appearance. However, the korban does not become disqualified simply because its appearance changed. Rather, this is an expression that means that the meat is left overnight to become disqualified because it was not eaten in the proper time. The meat of a korban must be eaten within a specific time frame. If it's not, it becomes disqualified as noisar and must be burnt away from the mizbeach. Similarly, the parts of a korban that should be burnt on the mizbeach also become disqualified if they're left off the mizbeach overnight. Since the entire oil must be burnt on the mizbeach on the day it's shechted or during the night that follows, any oil meat not placed on the mizbeach by the following morning becomes disqualified as noisar. Meat assumed to be from a shlamim must be left over 2 nights before it can be burnt as a disqualified korban, since the shlamim may be eaten over a period of 2 days and the night in between. That's the story of Zevazet Ubar Turasa. Then the next thing that you do is it has to be taken out of the place of burning to the place where you burn it, where karbanos psulim are burnt. This was an area in the Azara designated for burning disqualified karbanos. It cannot be eaten or burnt on the mizbeach because while it was lost, it wasn't supervised and may have become tameh. The meat and the evarim of a shechted korban must be constantly guarded against becoming tameh. If they're not, they're treated as possible tumah because of a disqualification, a psul called hesek hadas, a lapse of attention, and that's not going to be good. But it can also not be immediately burnt as a disqualified carbon because it may not have become tameh, and it's also to destroy a carbon if it might be good. So on the side that it's good, you cannot burn it because it's also to be, it's also to be mizalzel and kachim like that. It must therefore be left until it becomes disqualified, at which point it then can be burnt. If the meat is burnt in any case, what difference does it make which carbon we assume it to be? The answer is, what happens to someone who wrongfully ate the meat? If someone ate meat assumed to be an oila, so he was over the isra of me'ilah, which is deriving benefit from kachim, that's not meant for human benefit, and he must bring an asham me'ilos to atone for his sin. If he ate meat that's assumed to be from a chatas, he's not over a me'ilah, because the chatas may be eaten by kehanim. He has, however, been over the isra against the non-kayin, eating a chatas, if he's not a kayin, obviously, and if he ate meat that's assumed to be from a shlamim, he's not over on any isra, aside from the possibility that it may have been tameh, since shlamim meat may be eaten by anybody who's not tameh. Nimtza begvulin, if meat that was found anywhere in Eretz Yisrael outside Yerushalayim, evarim nevelos, if holims were found, they're assumed to be in nevela, which is meat of an animal that's not properly shechted. It's forbidden for a yid to eat such meat, and which were cut, the chatichas mutaris, and you have to feed it to the dogs, and it may not be eaten by a yid. Chatichas mutaris, if slices were found, then they're assumed to be from a properly shechted animal that was sliced up for human consumption, and they are therefore permitted to be eaten. This applies only in a city populated when it has a rive of yidden. In such a place, we may attribute the shechted meat to the yidden. However, if there are as many goyim in a city as yidden, then the meat may not be eaten, because then you have it's shackled the amount of yidden and goyim, and if you have a rive of goyim, then there's stark welcome to assume that it was there's a tzad that you have to be concerned that it comes from the goyim as well. B'shas haregel, if meat was found in the time of the Yom Tov, Shabbos Meruba, that there's plenty of meat, afev orim mutarim, even holims are permitted, because due to the great volume of meat being consumed during the Yom Tov, it was customary to cook whole pieces of the animals instead of slicing all the meat into smaller pieces. Mishnah Dalet. Behemish and nimtis mirushalayim ad migdal eder. If a live animal was found between Yerushalayim and Migdal Eder, which is a place not far from Yerushalayim, it's approximately 6.8 miles from Yerushalayim, or at that distance from Yerushalayim in any direction, 6.8 miles or so, which is 11 kilometers. Since most animals in Yerushalayim are kadosh as karbanos, we must assume that this animal is a carbon. Therefore, zecharim oilas, any male animals found there are assumed to be a carbon oila. Since the karbanos oila must be male animals, most male animals in Yerushalayim were used as oilas rather than shlamim. Shlamim can be male, while shlamim offerings may be either male or female. Thus it is logical that more male animals are used for oilas than for shlamim. Therefore, when you follow the roiv, when you have a suffix and you go bas roiv, it allows us to assume that any male found near Yerushalayim is an oila. And we assume that the animal is either an oila or shlamim, not a chatas or ashram or any other carbon, because oilas and shlamim are much more common to be brought than a chatas or an asham. Zivche in the kevos, live animals cannot become tamei. So you could bring them on the mizbeach. So the question is, why live animals could you bring on the mizbeach? And in the previous Mishnah Gimel, we said that you cannot eat it and it cannot be put on the mizbeach. The answer to that is because live animals cannot become tamei, therefore they did not become disqualified with hesek hadas. Hesek hadas is only one to a shefter. We have to make sure that the meat of the carbon doesn't become tamei. The kevos is zivchei shlamim. Any female animals found, they're assumed to be a carbon shlamim, and they're brought in the mizbeach as a shlamim. Since female animals cannot be brought as eilos, female animals found in Yerushalayim are assumed to be shlamim. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, haroy l'psachim psachim. If the animals that are found are fit to be carbon pesach, they're male sheep or goats in their first year, they're assumed to be a carbon pesach. If they're found within 30 days before Pesach, since the hilchas Pesach are taught beginning 30 days before the Yom Tov, people begin being makdish the animals for the carbon Pesach at that time. Therefore, small sheep and goats found during this period are assumed to be a carbon Pesach. According to Rabbi Yehuda, the finder may actually use the animal to be yaitz his own chiyuv of bringing carbon Pesach, meaning he could use this animal instead. The identity of the owner is discovered, the finder will then pay him for the animal. The Tanakama is not concerned that the animal might be carbon Pesach because he feels that people generally extremely careful with the animals that they were makdish as a carbon already, and especially as a Korban Pesach, and it's unlikely that a Korban Pesach had escaped or gotten lost. Now, it's interesting because Lamaisa, when we learned Psachim, we had a whole parak of Mishnayos of what to do and how to deal with the animal that ran away, the animal that got confused. So as much as I am careful about it, we still have many tziyurim in the Mishnah, how concerned we see the Mishnah is about making sure the animals don't get lost. Mishnah Hey. Berishayna, originally, what are we talking about over here? The previous Mishnah mentioned that animals found in the vicinity of Yerushalayim should be offered either as an oila or a shlama, depending on whether they are male or female. However, both oila and shlama karbanos must be accompanied by a mincha and nesachim, which is wine that they would pour in the mizbeach. So who pays for these? That's the question in the Mishnah. So sagt the Mishnah Berishayna hi mamashkin in esmaitel. The Bezdin in the Beis Hamikdash would take a collateral, which is they would seize the property of someone who refused to pay and hold it until he paid from the finder of a lost animal, atro maybe nesachel, until he would bring the mincha and the nesachim that accompany the flour and the wine that accompany the carbon. Chazru liyas manichin esav baruchin. So as a result, people began to leave the animals that they found and flee. They would run away so that they shouldn't become a chuyiv to pay for the nesachim. People were willing to go to the trouble of bringing the animals they found in the Beis Hamikdash, but they were unwilling to pay for the nesachim from their own pockets. They therefore ran away from the animal they found rather than take control over it. Now, there's nothing better to do than to take an animal, makve it on the mizbeach, but these people didn't want that because they didn't want to have to pay for it. Now we know, the Svar Makdashim, that it's a big deal, it's a big avodah to spend money on a mitzvah. It shows it shows the chavivus ha-mitzvah. It's not just the chavivus ha-mitzvah, it shows how much you machshav the mitzvah, and it's a grace of madrega to spend money on it. When people outbid each other for aliyahs, it gives HaKadosh Baruch Hu grace and nachaz of how much money they're willing to give to put down for a mitzvah. So once people started running away, there was the takanas bezdin that the nesachim should come from money from the Beis Hamikdash, from the original general fund used to pay for the karbanos tzibur from the trumas halishka, as we mentioned in Perik Dal. Mishnah Vav. Amr Shimon. Shiva dvar meskinu bezdin. V'ze'ach man. The rule instituted by the bezdin to use the money to pay for the nesachim of a found carbon was one of a group of similar halachas instituted by the Bezdin in regard to karbonos. This is one of them. The other 6 halachas are the following. If a guy sent in the carbon oila from overseas, a guy can be makdish an animal to be brought in the Beis Hamikdash. The Mishnah mentions specifically an oila because we follow the sheet of Rebbe Kiva who hold that goyim could donate only oilas and no other types of karbonos. The Mishnah speaks of a guy who sent his carbon from overseas, because if a guy were to live in Eretz Yisrael, then in that case he wouldn't send money for nesachim. He would simply be told to provide the nesachim. But when he lives overseas, he cannot be contacted. This is not an option. So I guess Bisman Azeh, when we have the Beis Hamikdash soon, we'll have that option. So he'll be able to pay for it also. Shalachim on nesachim, and he sent money for nesachim along with the, as we just explained, Krevin Mishalai, the nesachim were offered from his own money. The money he sent is used to pay for the nesachim. Imlav. But if he didn't send money for the nesachim, Krevin Mishal Tzibur, then the nesachim are offered from communal funds, from the Beis Hamikdash. This was the second halacha instituted by the Bezdin. If a yid sends a carbon without nesachim, the carbon would simply not be accepted without the money for nesachim being provided. With regard to a goy, however, Bezdin was misaken in order to avoid provoking animosity, that his offering, his carbon, may be accepted even if he neglected to provide payment for the nesachim, and the community funds, the mammon is the make carbon tzibur, can be used to pay for the nesachim. When someone is makdish an animal as a carbon and then he dies before bringing it to the Beis Hamikdash, the yarshim who yarshin him must pay for the nesachim. The Mishnah discusses what to do in an event that the person has no yarshim. Similarly, if a ger died without any yarshim, only a ger can die without yarshim. Every yid has yarshim, no matter how distant, since we all descend from the avos. However, when a guy converts to Yiddishkeit, it's as if he was reborn. It's gekatan shenayla dami. So Menatera is no longer halachically related to his biological relatives. So unless he leaves behind children from a Jewish wife, he does not have yarshim. If he also set aside money to be used as nesachim, then the nesachim have to be brought from his money. But if not, then they're offered from communal funds they cannot come from his estate, because when he died of Yarshim, all his property became ownerless and was acquired by whoever took possession of it first. If, on the other hand, the ger did have Yarshim, then the Sacham are paid for from his mammon, is from his Rishus. Okay. Tonight, Bezdenu, al Kohen Gadol Shemeis, Shetayim and Chasek Kreva Mishal Tzibur. Kohen Gadol brought a Karban Mincha daily, consisting of an Asir Se'efa of flour, fried in olive oil, and then baked into 12 loaves. Half the loaves were offered in the morning, and the other half was in the afternoon. These were known as Chavite Kohen Gadol. Kohen Gadol brought this daily carbon from his own money, from his own pocket. The Mishnah goes on to discuss who must pay for this carbon when the Kohen Gadol dies, and no one yet has been appointed to replace him. So there was a Tanai Bezdin, there's a stipulation from this Bezdin, al Kohen Gadol Shemeis, concerning a Kohen Gadol who died, that if another Kohen Gadol has not yet been appointed to take his place, to Haim and Chosek Kreva Mishal Tzibur, that his daily Karban Mincha, which must be brought, even though there's no Kohen Gadol in office, should be offered from the Karbonis Tzibur. Reb Shimon holds that it's a din deraisa that dictates that when a Kohen Gadol dies, his mincha should be brought from communal funds. However, when the peasants saw that the strain on the karbonos, on the funds of the tzibur were too great, they instituted that the yarshim of the Kohen Gadol must pay for the offering, for the Chaviti Kohen Gadol. However, when they saw that the yarshim were getting lazy about paying for these karbonos, they wanted to be mesakin. They're like shachov v'chos of yosem, to be re-mesakin the din deraisa, that these karbonos be paid with the money for karbonos tzibur. And that's why Reb Shimon still calls it a Tanai Bezdin, even though Be'ikr it's a mitzvah deraisa. Reb Yehuda says Mishal Yarshim, this carbon is paid for by the Yarshim. According to Reb Yehuda, this is the Din HaTorah. Ushleima is a krev, and both Reb Shimon and Reb Yehuda agree that when this mincha is brought, it was depending on, it doesn't matter which money they were using, whether it comes from the Yarshim or whether it comes from the money for Karbanos Tzibur, it was offered with the entirety, the whole Asir Seif in the morning and the whole Asir Seif in the afternoon, instead of splitting it, a single tenth of an Eifa between the morning and the afternoon Karbanos. I mean, you bring the whole thing again. This is learned from a pasuk that talks about this carbon. And this psukim is Machlekes Reb Shimon and Reb Yehuda how to learn the psukim. Okay. Mishnah Zayin, the last three remaining Xeris from this Bezdin that they said that Reb Shimon was talking about. An lamelach vala eitzim, this Bezdin was geyser, was masakin, concerning salt that was used to salt the karbonis on the mizbeach, as well as the wood that was used to fuel the fire that burnt on the karbonis. Sheyiyu ha-kohanim neyosim mehem, that the kohanim serving in the Beis Hamikdash should be able to make use of them for their own needs, meaning that to be able to use the salt to salt their own meat when they were using it, when they were cooked before eating it, and to make the fire to cook the meat, they were able to take from here. The meat eaten by Kehanim had less kedusha than the parts that are burnt on the Mizbeach, which are given to Hashem. Therefore, it should be also to use anything that you were makdish for use on the Mizbeach, such as salt and wood, for the sake of eating a carbon. Nevertheless, the Bezdin was masakin that these items may be used to prepare the Achilas HaKarban. The Bezdin is able to do this by stipulating that the initial kedusha of these items allows for this usage. The Kehanim may use these items only for preparing the meat for the karbanos for them to eat, but not to prepare any non-karbanos that they would eat, even food that they will eat together with karbanos in the Beis Hamikdash. So they couldn't use it if you have a bowl of soup from Shlamim and you have a bowl of soup from Chulin. So the Chulin, you cannot use the salt from the Mammon HaMikdash, but for the carbon you could use the Mammon HaMikdash, no problem. The Bezdin was misakin that this could be used. The next Gzera Takana deals with the Efa Para, which was used to be Mitar Mace, to be Mitar people from Tamei Mace. So the halacha was that they were Misakim Shlayim Moilim Ba'afra, that they should not transgress the Isser of Me'ilah, deriving personal benefit from something that you were Makdish, if you make personal use of the ashes of the Para Aduma. The ashes of the Para Aduma do not have any Me'ilah, even in HaTorah. The Mishnah nevertheless calls it Gzera from this Bezdin, because the Din HaTorah frees a person from the penalty for Me'ilah only for using the ashes, but still also to benefit from them. However, when people saw that there was no einish for using the ashes, they became lax about this Isser and used the ashes to treat wounds, and it became a problem. So they were masakin a new thing. Valakinan hapsulai shiyubois v'shal tzibur. The final gzera deals with the pairs of doves brought as offerings by people purifying themselves from certain kinds of tumah. Valakinan hapsulai shiyubois v'shal tzibur. And they decreed that when disqualified bird pairs are found among the birds bought by the Beis Hamikdash with the money deposited in the pushka for kinim, a new pair of birds should be brought to replace them using the money for karbanas tzibur. Rabbi Yossi says replacements for disqualified bird pairs are not brought from communal funds. Rather, hamasabik is a kinim, masabik is a psulos. The one who supplies bird pairs to the Beis Hamikdash must also supply replacements for lost or disqualified ones as part of his contract, because again, this was very much how the Beis Hamikdash would make money. They would have contracts with other people to be able to make more, to be able to fund more parts of the Beis Hamikdash.